My wife and I were demonstrating affection for one another. I'd already carried her to the height of pleasure twice, and now, after feeling excited, we were both getting closer to that moment. We simply lay there in happiness. When she opened her eyes, I tenderly kissed her and held her close as we gradually returned to ourselves. We reflected on the series of events that had led us to this point. My wife Stephanie and her friends, Chuck and Beverly Conrad, attended our monthly gathering last Friday. After supper at Legal Seafoods, we went to Phoenix for drinks and dancing. After the first cocktail, we danced and enjoyed ourselves before returning to our table for another drink. When James Wilson, the Patriots' new quarterback, entered the club with his entourage, the atmosphere became noticeably more exciting. They took a table at the other end of the club, and there was a sudden surge of enthusiasm. Brianna Brown, a local host and former Miss Massachusetts and Miss America finalist, had recently arrived. She looked lovely, and there were indications that her candidacy was being evaluated on a higher level. Her gang sat on her side of the room, near to the DJ booth. Beverly looked at Wilson with googly eyes. "Damn, he could throw those boots under my bed at any time," she murmured. Stephanie Chocolate was annoyed, so I decided to lighten the situation. "Ladies, do you remember you are married?" I was joking. "Come on, Steve. Relax," Beverly said. "It is unlikely to happen regardless. Now it is my time to worry." Chuck stated that it could end in divorce. "How would you react if Brian ended up with one of us?" "Chuck, this is simply a one-time thing," Stephanie said. "What is the harm?" "Okay, folks, let's settle down." I intervened. "We are just having fun." "Exactly." "Steve." Beverly joined in. "Let's continue to enjoy the evening." When Beverly mentioned that he was coming over here, the conversation gradually returned to its customary topics. "He's coming here," she explained. "Who?" I started asking, then looked over my shoulder, and sure enough, Wilson was heading our way, stopping at each table to sign autographs or pose for selfies. Finally, he reached our table. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you mind if I invite your lovely wife to dance?" Although I appreciated that he asked me first. I was about to say no when I noticed Stephanie's head bobbing up and down like a yo-yo. I nodded, and when he turned back, he didn't have to ask since Stephanie had already stood up, grabbed his hand, and led them out to the dance floor. I must admit that they were a gorgeous couple, but when the music switched to a slow song, she sank into his arms. I felt my fury rising just as I was ready to stand up. I felt a soft hand on my shoulder and heard a beautiful voice ask, "Can I invite you?" I turned around and probably looked like a complete idiot staring into the bluest eyes I'd ever seen. And they belonged to Brianna Brown. I felt as if I were in a trance as I stood up and followed her onto the dance floor. The slow song continued to play as she placed her arms around my neck, pressing her gorgeous chest against mine. I gingerly placed my hands on her waist, but she moved back perilously close to a perfect fifth position. "Sorry, I do not want to appear ungrateful, but why me? There must be a dozen guys who are closer to your leader than I am." Her laughing was lovely, and her eyes shone with a unique brightness. "I witnessed what happened to your wife and Wilson," she said, and must have observed my frown. "I understand your feelings. I've witnessed this before, and I'm afraid it rarely ends well." "What do you mean?" "I do not comprehend. Almost every night she leaves with him, leaving her husband alone and embarrassed. In rare instances, the wife returns to her husband. I hope I can help your wife make the proper decision, but why? Who are you?" She gave a thoughtful glance and turned away, but not before I noticed a second tear in her eyes. "This is a long story. Perhaps I will tell you depending on how the rest of the evening goes. My name is Brian. I know I recognized you. I am Steve Smith." She raised an eyebrow at me. "Yes, Smith. I understand this sounds pretentious as hell. Why not just Smith, right? My parents are originally from England and wanted to keep a modest link to their home country." When the song finished, I took her to the table, thanked her for the dance, and returned to our table. Stephanie was there already. There were eyes pointing daggers at me. "So, the prodigal son returns. Did you enjoy dancing with this beauty?" "I apologize. Why is my dance with Brian worse than yours? With Wilson? Isn't it Brianna, already by name?" "I presume you addressed them as Mr. Wilson?" she commented, blushing as you sang. I responded. When I sat down, we resumed conversing with Chuck and Beverly. However, the tension might be cut with a knife. Stephanie realized she needed to use the restroom around an hour later. Surprisingly, Beverly did not accompany her, instead claiming that she needed to get something from the wardrobe and leaving the club. Beverly arrived a few minutes later, but Stephanie was nowhere to be seen. "I've got to go check on her." Beverly looked anxious but said nothing. My trip to the restroom led me to Brianna's table, where she stood up and stopped me with a hand on my chest. "Thank you, Brianna. I need to check on Stephanie. Steve, I don't think she is here." Wilson went to the bathroom at the same time, but neither of them returned. "Come with me. I'll search the ladies' room and you can check the men's, but I doubt we'll find them there." She was correct. As I returned to my table, I had a strange suspicion. Chuck sighs, emboldened by the sight of Brianna. But Beverly appeared even more worried than before. I told Beverly, "Stephanie appears to have departed the building. Do you know anything about this?" Chuck strained to pull his gaze away from Brianna. "And look at Beverly." "Beverly," he mentioned, "what have you done?" I purchased the coat and delivered it to Stephanie at the front door." "Why did she need it? How did you know she needed it?" "I knew this from the way she looked at me. She needed him to go with Wilson. If I hadn't already spent, I would have sprung out of my chair. Did you think this was a good idea? Why? This may be her only encounter with a real celebrity. This opportunity only comes once in a lifetime. Being with an actual celebrity? Do you want to be a true celebrity? Come on, Steve. It's not such a huge deal. I guess you aren't going with Brian." "Stefan," he replied, chuckling. "I'm not so sure," Brianna said. "I totally forgot she was here. Come on, Steve. Let us get out of here," she remarked, grasping my hand as we approached the exit. We retrieved her coats, and as they helped her put them on, I told them, "Thanks for the ego boost. I believe I'll go home to my empty house and prepare for the end of my marriage." "Why do you believe that this was simply an impetus for narcissism? Let us take your car. Why should Stephanie be the only one to have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity?" I looked at her, expecting to hear anything. "Gotcha." But instead I noticed a warm, brilliant smile. What the hell? I assumed I didn't have any better options at the moment. So, with our arms around one another's waists, we strolled to the garage and into my vehicle. "Where is Milady?" I inquired, and she guided me to an upscale apartment structure. The garage attendant was ready to shoot me away when he noticed Brian motioning for me to enter. Brianna showed me where to park, and we took the elevator to her apartment. I was astounded by her magnificent residence. The living room featured floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Brian had simply dropped her coat on a nearby chair, and I followed suit. "Do you want something to drink?" Brian asked me. "I will have the same as you," I said. She poured 2 glasses of white wine. She sat on the edge of the couch, patting the seat next to her as they sat. She pressed the remote, and soothing music began to play from hidden speakers while we sat in companionable stillness, drinking wine. I was curious as to what her endgame was. Did she truly believe that we would sleep together if that were the case? Can I? I had no illusions about what Stephanie was likely to do if she hadn't already. But I believed in my wedding vows. The only issue was that Stephanie did not appear to share my ideas on marriage vows. Can I break them? As Beverly mentioned, this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Can I afford to give it up? Brianna appeared to be trying to take the decision out of my hands as she snuggled against my shoulder and wrapped her arms around me. I was simply sitting there, taking in the situation. Not to mention Rihanna's alluring ring, which she supposedly delivered after becoming impatient with my indecision. She stood up, pulled me to my feet, and began dancing. Shyness was not the rule of the day, and she positioned my hands directly below 5th place. I began to comprehend that, as the board stated, resistance is pointless, and that I could enjoy and deal with the repercussions afterward. I did not wait for her to make a move. I threw my head back in as she turned to complain. I held her face in my hands and kissed her lips. I'm not sure how long we stood there kissing, but when we pulled apart, we were out of breath. Her face was flushed, and I am sure mine was too. She brought me into her bedroom. I heard lovely music as she sat me down on her bed. She started unbuttoning her blouse, and I did the same, as if in a trance. I was just pulling off my shirt when she removed hers, showing her free chest. I'm not too concerned with bra sizes, but her chest looked great on her shape. She gently undressed, luring and getting me on. Then she helped me take off my clothes and began stroking my manhood, which I had just pulled out of my trousers. I knew I wasn't going to survive long, and it only took a moment for the pressure to grow. "Brianna, I believe I will arrive," I said, but she simply smiled at me. And that's when I crossed the finish line. I took her hand and gave her a long kiss. She returned my kisses. "Okay." She indicated my turn and sat on the side of the bed. I don't want to brag, and I probably shouldn't because I had fantastic professors, but I am good at pleasing women. I took out all of my techniques and gave her everything I had, and she was soon writhing in sweet agony. We were basking in the light of a magnificent anthem. Was it better than Stephanie? To utilize a cliché? It was different. "Brianna, you said you'd explain why you wanted to help me, to aid us." I said. She turned away and I saw tears in her eyes again. About 5 years ago, I was working in a small television studio and just getting started. At the time, I was married to a guy who looked like you. He was my strongest supporter, always eager to push the envelope when a new opportunity needed us to relocate. We were at a charity function when the studio's head invited me to dance. He didn't even ask my spouse, so I took his hand and left him seated. I scarcely noticed my husband's rage and pushed it to the background as Chuck took me away. His name was Charles, but he thought Chuck made him appear more like a common man, despite the fact that he thought little of those he regarded as inferior. I can't say he employed any outstanding seduction skills on me, but he did make some subtle moves, some not-so-subtle suggestions that he may improve my career. To my lifelong sorrow, I left the club with him, not looking back at my husband. I was informed he put on a brave face but was shattered. I wish I could say the night was amazing, or at least my career took off. However, in both situations, the opposite was true. The intimate was underwhelming at best. He appeared to believe that simply being with him must be a delight. Meanwhile, reports about our affair created issues. He was a large enough fish that the dirt wouldn't stick. However, they let me go with enough severance pay to prevent me from suing. My career faced a setback, but I've clearly recovered. Although it aches my heart to think about my ex, I learned that he remarried and has children, something we always talked about. She couldn't take it anymore, so I held her. My own eyes welled up thinking about how Stephanie and I talked about our son and future children, wondering if we'd ever have them. Brianna had gone asleep, so I drew the cover over her and cuddled her as she unconsciously snuggled up to me. I awoke to find myself lying in bed alone, with the delightful aroma of bacon emanating from the kitchen. I used the restroom, walked into the kitchen, and was welcomed by Brian wearing a long t-shirt, her buttocks poking out teasingly from time to time. She grinned at me over her shoulder. "The coffee should be ready," she replied, indicating to the coffee pot in the corner. I poured myself a cup of God's vinegar and sipped it until she served me a plate of bacon and eggs. We eat quietly until I address the elephant in the room. "So, where are we going from here?" For a few moments, she was lost in thought. First, she spoke, breaking the stillness. "You and Stephanie must pick where to go. Can any of you survive what occurred last night? What about us?" She laughed. "Not without malice, Steve. There is no us, at least not right now. We had a great night, but we hardly know each other. You are married unless you or Stephanie decide differently. If you can't figure it out, perhaps we might meet up. See whether it's more than just an intimate attraction. I must warn you ahead of time that my career is my first priority right now. If I obtain a better opportunity, I may have to relocate. Could you move out or settle for a long-distance relationship? In addition, in my position, people frequently pester me, and there may be gossip. I guarantee you right now that if we become a couple, all that will happen is rumor. But you must be prepared to deal with it immediately. Return home to your wife and see whether there is anything left in your marriage that may be saved. Here's my business card. Let me know how things go." Words spoken as she hugged me, kissed me tenderly on the lips, and sent me on my way. I arrived home right as Wilson was dropping Stephanie off. He gave me a tiny smirk as he drove out of the driveway. Stephanie and I stepped up to the door simultaneously. I opened the door and she ran by me. She sent off the scent of fresh shampoo and soap. I followed her, closing the door behind me. "Where have you been?" she asked defiantly. "Is she asking me about this?" I reflected on what she did. "I was with Brenda." She almost broke into laughter. "Yeah, as if you were probably holed up in some cheap motel licking your wounds. She drove me insane. No, ask Chuck and Beverly. They saw and asked me to dance. Then we departed together. She probably took pity on you. Put on a show so you don't appear like such a loser. She probably dumped you as soon as you exited the club. Things weren't going as I had hoped. I felt we could at least try to move on from what had transpired. However, the sheer lack of respect for me made this increasingly unlikely. I decided that one more conversation could lead to the end of our relationship, so I went over to our closet, grabbed a large suitcase, and began shoving items inside. She merely stood there with her arms crossed over her chest, a wry smirk on her lips, clearly believing I was bluffing. Her expression altered as I passed by her and toward the front door. "Come on, you aren't going to leave just because I had a brief fling?" "No, I'm leaving because you're disrespectful to me. FYI, I spent the night with Brianna, and it was fantastic. I returned home hoping that we could deal with our common sins. However, I realize that this is now impossible. Do not call me. I will call you when I am ready to discuss." I stepped out of the home without closing the door, and Sa was standing there watching me get into the car. I didn't want to give her the joy of witnessing my tears. So I rounded the corner, slowed down, and let the tears flow. I paid for a week in an extended stay motel, and before I could settle into my bed, the phone rang. I was about to ignore it, thinking it was Stephanie, but when I realized it was Chuck, I responded, "Hello, Chuck. Hello, Steven. What the hell happened?" Stephanie just phoned Beverly, and boy, was she upset. She was infuriated. I almost screamed into the telephone. She left me for a joke, and when I told her I'd spent the night with Brian, she laughed. "Hey, Steve Wilson isn't just another jock. And you must admit that you and Brianna are a little difficult to believe in. You too." I said, "Damn it, you saw us together. You saw us go together. There is no one. Respect me." "Of course, we respect you, Steve, but you and Brianna, come on, be serious. But Stephanie and Wilson are pretty convincing. Look, I'm not sure what's going to happen between Stephanie and me, but I believe I need to make new acquaintances. Goodbye." "Wait, Steve." But I am already detached. Stephanie and I talked back and forth for a time. She even apologized for the Wilson stunt. But the actual sticking point was her lack of regard for me. Even Brianna's call confirming our night together did not help. "Nice try, Steve," she said. "I believe you are a charity project this month." I spent another week in the motel. Brianna and I dated a few times at the host's. I even taunted Brianna about her new mysterious boyfriend, but she just brushed it off. One advantage of being alone was that it allowed me to focus on my writing. I occasionally put tales on internet sites, much to Stephanie's displeasure, which I believe was another example of her contempt. Brian, on the other hand, insisted on looking after I complained that Stephanie placed my texts away and never read them. I refused. I should not have worried about more embarrassment. Brianna was impressed and offered some recommendations. I believe that was the tipping point, and I filed for divorce. Stephanie was stunned. "Are you really planning to divorce me because of my dumb romance with Wilson?" "Actually, no. But the fact that you think my humiliation is a little matter helps to explain why I'm divorcing you. You do not respect me. I wonder whether you ever did. You do not believe Brian is interested in me or my experiences. Would you laugh without even reading them?" "Brianna thinks they are pretty decent," I said and walked out the door. Stephanie was struggling with her divorce, but I'm not sure why. Perhaps she didn't like the thought of losing her buddies. I attempted to help, but I believe they exacerbated the matter by laughing at the prospect of me and Brianna telling me that I would never find anybody as attractive as Stephanie. Of course, the court required a consultation. I performed the charade. I didn't do anything silly like play with my phone throughout the sessions, but any time it was brought up, I made it apparent that I no longer wanted to marry Stephanie. Stephanie consented to the counselor's recommendation that the court proceed with the divorce process. It was difficult being a father every weekend, but my son and I did our best. It helped that Stephanie recognized the divorce was finalized. Was it very contentious? We were able to live peacefully together. Brianna attended the final court hearing. Stephanie's expression as we walked out holding hands was priceless. We maintained amicable connections for the majority of the year. Despite our great performance, we offered no promises regarding attorneys. Brianna has a hectic schedule and no marital obligations. I was able to devote more time to my writing, and Brianna continued to offer helpful advice. When my final story was completed, she suggested that I submit it to a publisher, but I was frightened of rejection. Brianna eventually received an offer from a Chicago studio, which was a significant step forward, and we had one last night. We missed dinner to spend as much time together as possible, but we did make love. It wasn't about unbridled freedom. We probably spent more time hugging and discussing our emotions, hopes, and dreams for the future. After she fell asleep, I got up and made a few more modifications to my story before crawling back into bed and rolling up with her, savoring the sensation of her cuddling even closer to me. When I awoke, she had already gotten out of bed, so I went to the bathroom for a brief shower. As I passed by the laptop table, I was surprised to see it open. I was certain I closed it last night. I shrugged and walked into the kitchen, where Brianna was preparing breakfast. I approached from behind, hugged her, and buried my nose in her neck. She turned her head and kissed me. "Breakfast is nearly ready. How about coffee? Your wish is my law," I replied with a big bow. I poured coffee and placed the cups on the table. We squandered the majority of the cooking time by simply pushing the food onto our plates and staring at each other. Finally, it was time to tidy up so I could leave and Brianna could ready to depart. We had already packed the most of her belongings into the car, and the moving company arrived to pick up the remainder. I grabbed my laptop, hugged and kissed Brianna goodbye, and we parted ways with hopeful vows to keep in touch. I gave myself a few weeks to grieve the end of our relationship before carefully entering the dating world. I avoided areas where I might expect to encounter Stephanie or our old crew, and while I did see them occasionally, we never got close. One day I was going through the mail and came across an envelope from Battles Publishing. I was puzzled and set it aside as I went through the rest of my mail. I brought the envelope into the kitchen, sat down with a cup of coffee, and opened it. "Dear Mr. SMI, we received your manuscript and are seriously contemplating publishing it. Please call me as soon as possible to set up an appointment. Sincerely yours, Melanie Wilson, Associate Editor. What's going on? I have never said anything to anyone." Then I remembered the laptop, which I had left closed but discovered open in the morning. Brianna. She copied and showed the file to someone. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to kick or kiss her. On the one hand, she had two of my back. On the other hand, the publisher expressed interest in my story. I resolved to get even without telling her. I had no idea what connection she may have, but I hoped they could keep anyone from telling her until I was ready. I contacted Miss Wilson. Will make an appointment. It didn't take long to reach an agreement, but before I got too happy, I needed to wait for the editor to finish his work. I was pleased to find that the letters appeared more red than black. I suppressed my pride and began working diligently on all of her adjustments. I had to concede that she was correct. Most of the time, she listened to my concerns. Seriously, she was almost always correct. After 3 passes, we were prepared to print. I didn't tell Brianna, even though we'd chatted several times since I received the letter. I was having a book signing in Chicago and called Brianna to arrange a visit. She opened the door and hugged and kissed me. "Steve, I am very delighted to see you again. What drew you to Chicago? Business or pleasure? I hope it is both." I winked and replied, "I could help with that last one." "I hope so," she said, winking back as she walked out of the house. She was astounded by the limousine. "Wow, things must be looking up," she said. "You could say that," I responded. "This is your city. Why don't you choose the restaurant?" She informed the driver, and we drove off despite the fact that we had no reservations. They recognized us right away and we were seated. "So, Steve, what business led you to Chicago?" I said, "It's a surprise," and she pounded. "We eat deliciously but forego dessert." "Let us go to my apartment," she inquired with a flirty look. "I have a few things to do." "First, why don't you join me? I do not think you would be bored." She was disappointed and perplexed, but nodded approvingly. The limo rolled up to my hotel, and the driver assisted Brian, and I followed. I let her enter the lobby and climb the escalator to the 2nd story, where the book signing event would take place. I couldn't keep her from noticing the sign with my photo on it and running into my arms. "Steve, you did it. You did it. I knew you could do it." "Well, I got a little help," I responded with a smile. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Steve." "Don't be modest, Brianna. I never submitted my story and nobody else had access to my laptop. You will be a skilled thief. You left your laptop open. I closed it that night." She reddened. "I am not angry. I would never have the bravery to share my tale. You believed in me more than I did in myself. I could never thank you enough. There's no need to thank me, Steve. I am just glad to see you prosper." At that point, a representative from the publishing business approached me and announced that it was time to sign the contract. So I hurriedly kissed Brian and followed the representative to the table that had been arranged for me. I saw Brianna lean against the wall, smiling, as a lengthy line of people waited to sign their books. Her smile faded slightly when some women posed for selfies and kissed me on the cheek. I simply smiled, shrugged, and was relieved when she smiled back. Finally, the signing concluded in a joint, with Brianna giving her a large kiss to compensate for all the kisses they had received. "How about we return to my apartment so I can welcome you to Chicago?" As tempting as it may sound, my room is located upstairs. Besides, I've already let the limo driver leave. He smiled widely as he said, "Not too confident." We headed up to my room. We spent the night reconnecting with our bodies, then napped before ordering breakfast for our room. "Steve, where should we go now? Can you remain for a while?" "Sorry, but I can't. I have a couple more dates on the tour before returning to my day job." "I understand, Steve, but let us stay in touch. I genuinely like our time together. That is what we did. We talked, we texted, we emailed, we made telephone calls. Whatever worked at the time, my publisher expressed interest in the second book, and I dedicated every 3 minutes to it. As soon as I sent it to the editor, I called Brianna. "Hello, Steve. It is nice to hear your voice again. I agree. I have wonderful news. I wrote another book. That is excellent news. When can I read the next great American novel? This will take time. I just presented the first draft, but that is not all. If the book does well, they will offer me a contract for 3 additional books. I'll be able to quit my job and write full-time. That's terrific, Steve. I knew you had the potential. Yes, it is. I owe it all to you. Without support, I would still be writing just for my own pleasure. Don't say that, Steve. You have real talent. Sooner or later, it would have manifested itself. Maybe so. But there are thousands of talented people who simply don't get that kind of breakthrough. If you hadn't sent my story, who knows if I would have had the courage to present it myself. We argued, but she knew I was right. I don't know if it was my experience with the first book or if I just had more confidence, but the editing process went very smoothly and the book was soon ready to go to press. I spent most of my vacation on my first book tour, so I had to take unpaid leave and plan my stop in Chicago for the whole weekend. I skipped looking for a hotel and spent the weekend with Brianna. I couldn't get enough of Brianna's amazing body and couldn't figure out why she was so attracted to me, and eventually, I had to open my big mouth. God, Steve, I love you, but you men can be so ignorant sometimes. She suddenly fell silent. Neither of us had ever said the L word before. Seriously, Steve? She continued. I can be as caught up as the next person. Superficial attraction. But lasting love means seeing beneath the surface. Sure, you're attractive, but what's special about you is what's on the inside. Even after what Stephanie did to you, I had to practically seduce you into my bed. What can I say? She was right, and I had no idea. Sorry, Brianna, I don't know what my problem was. Maybe I just don't value myself. Maybe Stephanie has punched a hole in my self-confidence, but I shouldn't have projected that onto you. It's okay, Steve, I understand. You just continue to be a kind, caring person, and you will never have to doubt my love for you. She just told me she loved me again, and I didn't tell her I loved her. Although being the shrewd woman I am, I think she knew I could not leave the start in the air. I love you too, Brianna. I know, silly, she said, and gave me a saucer and kiss. The rest of the tour went well, as did book sales. When I got home, I invited Brenda to stay. We visited a few old places, and people newest before seemed amazed that we were still together. Others recognized us from her occasional reporting on the show. I even got some recognition for my books from time to time. We would cross paths with someone from the old company, but I was not interested in rubbing their nose in my success, both personal and professional. For their part, they seemed more angry than embarrassed. Well, life is too short to waste on fools. The first 2 nights, our love was wild and full of passion, but I had other plans for our last night. I took her to the most romantic restaurant in the city where our conversation was full of endearments, but nothing special. No, I didn't stage a big proposal at the restaurant. I knew that serious discussions would follow and wanted to find a more private place. Where are we going to dance today, Steve? Actually, I was thinking maybe we could go straight home tonight if that's okay. "Of course, Steve," she said, clearly not understanding what I was thinking when we got to my house. I hung up our coats and asked her to sit while I got the wine. Sitting down, I handed her a glass and proposed a toast for love and friendship. I said, "For love and friendship." She repeated in the clinked glasses. I sipped the wine quietly, watching Brianna after finishing the wine. She jumped up, almost swallowing the ring. I put in her glass. "Do Thursday," she muttered. "Is this what I think?" I turned to her and took her hands. "And mine." "Yes, Brianna, it is. I cannot describe how my life has changed since you came into it. I can only imagine what it might be like if you were a part of this forever. Please say that you will be my wife. Steve, if you only knew how much I want to say yes, but I already told you that my career comes first, and if a better offer comes, I'll probably take it. I can ask you to rearrange your life every time I change jobs. You won't have to." "What do you mean? My last book was successful?" "Successful enough that a publisher gave me a 3-book deal with a big enough advance that I could quit my job and write full-time. And I did." "Did what?" "I was discharged from the job as soon as my lease is up. I'll be moving to Chicago, if you allow me. I would like us to be together." She just sat there with her eyes wide open in a mouth agape, and then she threw herself into my arms. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." We had a small wedding. My parents flew in with my son, Danny, and Brian. His parents were there with her sister. We spent Saturday with my family, seeing as many places as we could pack into one day in. Brianna used her weathered real magic to give us a sunny day to get married by the lake. After tearful goodbyes full of happiness, we went on our honeymoon to Barbados. It would be nice to say that we lived happily ever after, and in general we did. But 2 powerful careers coupled with egos. And yes, I had my share, although I didn't understand why, can cause some petty jealousy. But we made a promise to always talk about everything, and we smoothed out the bumps in the road. Luckily, there was only one step in Brianna's career. Moving to New York City for the Today Show. It didn't really. Steve A, though, since I could write anywhere. We had been living in New York for about a year when Brianna surprised me with a pregnancy test. I didn't even know she was off birth control, but I was ecstatic and couldn't wait to be a full-time dad again. I love Dana to death, and it's so hard to say goodbye when my weekend is over. It was a little surreal having the whole country following our pregnancy, but we got used to it. She gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, Brittany, and luckily she seems to have inherited her mother's looks. Of course, the program had to have photos as soon as possible after birth and videos soon after. I had just finished a book tour for my 5th book in. The publisher wanted me to sign a new contract, but I didn't feel like I had another topic, but I promised them first place if I wrote more. Meanwhile, royalties from the books coupled with some movie deals kept the cash flowing. And of course, Rihanna was making a lot of money, so I settled happily into my new role as Mr. Mom. If you ever asked me if I was happy that my wife cheated on me, I would ask you if you were crazy. But here and now, I am happier than I ever could have imagined. Thank you for taking time to hear today's story. If you enjoyed this essay, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your or someone else's situation, please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care.